Does the term spare tire have a different meaning other than automotive? Have you used your scratch awl to poke a hole in your new leather belt? Well, then it's time to shed those pounds, my friends. It's time to build a Roubo bench. That'll waste away the weight. Welcome to the Renaissance Woodworker, episode number 32. This week we continue our Roubo bench saga, and we will pick up in the lamination phase of the top. Hey everybody, I'm Shannon Rogers, your host, and thanks for coming back. Thanks for listening and watching. If you have questions, comments, concerns, anything at all, send me an email at shannon@rogersfinewoodworking.com. You can find me on Twitter at RenaissanceWW, and you can come by the blog at rogersfinewoodworking.com/blog and leave a comment and take a look at some of the other stuff I've got going on there. I definitely keep other posts going besides what I talk about in the podcast. I've also got kind of a photo journal of the Roubo bench build going on there as well. This week, though, I want to pick up where we left off. The last Roubo episode was talking mostly about milling and getting the parts ready to go. This is really the first construction phase, and I start laminating up the parts for the top. So without further ado, let's jump on down to the shop and let's pick up this discussion at the bench.
Okay, I'm getting ready to glue up a bunch of the boards for the top. And these have all been jointed and planed, and they are now 4 square. One of the things I want to do, though, to ensure a clean mating, I may have a few little nicks in my planer blade, so I may have a few little lines along the top from the planer itself, but I also want to create just a very, very slight hollow along each face to remove kind of the center meat that may get in the way of a clean joint along the top. So I'll take my jack plane, and I like to work from the end of the board back, and I'll just be taking passes right down the middle. Just kind of work my way back to the board. You can see I'm not getting as consistent as shaving all the way down to the end of the board because I'm starting to plane out a little hollow. Yeah, lose contact right there. There, just about hollow there. Now you probably won't be able to see this on the camera, but if I pulled a straight edge up, let me see if I can get a shot of this for you guys. There's a very slight hollow right in the center. Very slight, but it's enough to allow for a nice clean mate of the joints as I go into glue up.
So here we go. It's time to spread on some glue. And you've heard me mention before during this build that you're going to need lots of glue. I'm actually going to be using a roller to apply all this glue. And what I discovered actually, the first I would change rollers in between each glue up and just throw it away, but that first time I started using the roller, it really sucked up the glue in that sponge, so I had to use quite a bit more glue in that first go around. But basically once that roller gets saturated, you can spread the glue out pretty easily, and it's just a matter of running the glue down the boards and rolling them out. I decided the best way to go ahead and glue all this up was to set them in the clamps and have the parallel clamps working vertically. That way I could let gravity work with me a little bit, not having to worry so much about lining them up. lining the boards up so that they were flat, it was a lot easier to slide them back and forth since gravity was pushing them in the direction of the glue joint here. So the first glue up I decided to go ahead and glue up 3 boards at the same time, knowing that the total width would still be something that I could true up on my 6-inch joiner. And once I get these 2 in place, then you guessed it, it's back to glue. Rolling on a lot more glue, and again I am putting glue on both mating faces. There is a pretty substantial amount of glue in this joint, so I did get a pretty good amount of squeeze out of this, but you know, I can clean all that up later. And remember, these boards are heavy. Ow! Like that right there. Careful as you're lifting those things, make sure you've got a good grip because they are heavy. And slap that last board on top, and wanted to make sure I checked, got the ends lined up. The boards are not all the same length, and I wasn't too worried about that. So now it's time to put on the clamps. And this is really just an exercise in how many clamps can you put on? How many clamps do you have in the shop? And can you put them all on these boards? So that's the 4th clamp right there. And there's the 5th clamp. That's 6 clamps. 7 clamps. 8 clamps, and I've run out of jet clamps. I'm using the Peachtree Parallel Pro clamps now. 9 clamps. And 10 clamps.
Alright, so I'm gluing up the top boards in earnest at this point. I was kind of holding off on doing the full glue up until I had my bench-crafted vise. I could really take stock of what material I would need to remove to install the vise, and just make sure I had everything in hand before I got too far. So I'm borrowing a technique that I learned from my good friend Loogie. That's Mark Hochstein over, he's Loogie on Lumberjocks. He was building the 21st Century workbench, and he discovered that if he glued up the boards 1 board at a time, he was able to take a parallel clamp or any kind of clamp and fit it along the perpendicular to the actual clamping force in order to keep the boards in line. That way you don't have to worry about slipping and sliding as much, and there'll be a lot less planing when it comes to total flattening in the end. So unfortunately, I read that on his blog on Lumberjocks after I'd already done a few sub-assemblies. So I've got 2 groups of 3 boards already glued up, but I'm taking one of the segments that I've already started on. I'm just going to start adding 1 board at a time. I've got a little technique I'm going to use to glue up those 3-inch or 6-inch wide sub-assemblies later on. But let me show you what I'm doing here so you can better understand. I've got 3 boards gluing up right now. Now, 2 of these boards, this one and this one, are from that monstrous 3-inch thick plank that I got most recently. So generally I'm dealing with 1 3/4 inch thick boards, and I can glue 3 of them together pretty easily. In this instance, I went ahead and glued these 2 together, and now the glue is already cured. You can see there's dried glue on the bottom, and I just recently added this top board to that. And what that does, adding 1 board at a time, allows me to take a parallel clamp right here, clamp it across the width to keep the boards in line, and I put 3 of those, 1 in the middle and 1 on either ends to keep them in line with one another, and then kind of lightly tighten those up, and then began to tighten the clamps vertically all the way down the line. As I got it tighter and tighter, I went back and adjusted the horizontal clamps just to make sure everything is all in line with one another. Once this is dry, and I take all these clamps off, I'll add another board to the top of it and repeat the same process all over again. So what do I do with those already glued up sub-assemblies that are quite a bit thicker? And here's a shot of my other stock. These 3 boards, 1, 2, 3, are already glued together, and these 3 boards are already glued together. In fact, this has already been jointed. Obviously, you can't fit a clamp across these, so what I'm going to use is a series of cawls, and I'll probably put a slight spring or a slight bow in those cawls in order to get really good clamping pressure, and that way it'll stretch across these segments and allow me to clamp up those wider segments together, hopefully keeping the entire thing much flatter and saving me on a whole heck of a lot of planing once the bench is all put together and glued. I'm going to go ahead and glue let's see, about 22 or 23 inches of bench width together. I've got several other boards set aside for the dog block and for the front apron piece, if you will, that will eventually be dovetailed into the end cap. That's part of the instructions putting in the bench-crafted vise. So really I've got really 3 more glue-ups to do, and the major part of the bench top will all be ready and glued up together, and I'll start the installation of the bench-crafted vise at that point.
Here I'm rolling some more glue back on that second 3-board assembly that I put together, and I'm going to go ahead and add 1 board at a time here and be able to use that kind of cross-clamping technique in order to keep this eventually 4-board glue-up line together. So same as we did before, just rolling on the glue, and again, careful as you lift these into place. This particular 4-board section got particularly monstrous, and I could see that adding 1 board at a time and clamping across it would be a lot easier in the long run. So here I'm putting the first clamp crossways here on the far end, and that's basically just aligning up that glue joint. Putting another one in the middle to line that up. And then finally 1 here on the other end. And as I tighten this down, you can really see that board move back into place and line up with the others. It just makes it so much easier in the long run. As you can see, apply a lot more clamps, wipe off some of the squeeze out. And here's the 4-board glue up. This beast is a monster. Let me tell you, it weighs about 80-85 pounds now that the whole thing's glued together. So then from there, here are the 3 sub-assemblies that I've put together. Those 2 3-board assemblies that I did before I thought about doing the cross-clamp technique, and then the 4-board assembly. And then back here we've got the 4 remaining boards, and I've got them numbered. The dog block, 2 laminate strips, then the final front piece that will be dovetailed into the end cap once the end vise is in place. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and joint and thickness plane the 3 sub-assemblies. Here I am, jointing that first 6 inch. It's about 5 3/4 inch wide, and then here's the second 3-board sub-assembly, jointing that. And these were really heavy, and I needed to make sure I really had good in-feed and out-feed support on these. And I actually started to move the joiner across the floor. And then it's just over to the thickness planer and getting them not quite to final dimension. I planed them to about 4 1/8 inch thick. Didn't have to take that much off to get to there. And here's the second 3-board assembly going through and getting that down to final thickness. The really tough part was the last section, and as I said, this sucker's about 85 pounds. It really took some manhandling to get that in place. I had to readjust my in-feed and out-feed tables quite a bit to get that, and the planer definitely got a workout as I was putting this board through. And it was so wide I wasn't paying attention, and I actually caught the dust collection hose, and boy, that makes a mess with the power assisted fan in this DeWalt planer. It was just kicking chips all over the place. So now I'm going to go ahead and make the cawls that I was talking about to allow me to glue the thicker, wider sections together. And this is just some scrap ash I lying around and put some packing tape on it to repel the glue. And then, what do you think's next? Yep, time to roll in some more glue. Here I'm going to take the 3-board assembly and glue it to the 4-board assembly. And again, this is even heavier as I'm lifting this sucker in place. Flip it up on top there, and I think once I got this lined up and started putting clamps on, I think I just about cleared my clamp racks of clamps that were more than 20 inches wide at this point, because this glue up is around 15 inches right now. So I'm going ahead and put the cross clamping pressure on the 2 ends as I did before, and now I'm going to use those cawls in place. And essentially, as you can see, I've got a clamp onto the bottom of the assembly and one on the top, and this really helped to line the whole assembly up. This is a total of 7 boards and the clamps here. And again, as I tighten that down, you can actually see those boards kind of cinch together into really, really nice alignment. And then just for extra measure, I've got one of these wooden screw clamps, and it had just enough reach to reach across that glue joint. Tightened that in place, and that really just made sure that everything was perfectly in line with one another. Here it is, every clamp in the shop on this assembly.
Alright, well, after some serious heavy lifting, a whole lot of rolling on of glue, more heavy lifting, more glue, a lot more heavy lifting, and a lot of twisting of clamps, we have the main assembly of the bench completely stacked and glued up here. This section of bench is a little over 8 feet long. It is 4 inches thick, and right now it's 19 and a quarter inches wide. And this is the primary assembly. From here I have to get the bench set up for the bench-crafted vise, and then I'll be adding a few laminations to the front to bring the total width of the bench to just over 25 inches. So right now this bench top, I couldn't even tell you how much it weighs. More than I can lift, put it that way. Each one of these sections of 3 weighs about 50 to 60 pounds a piece, so it's an extremely heavy, very robust bench, but it's going to last a lifetime. I'm really excited about this. Let me go ahead and show you what I'm doing here. What we're looking at is actually the bottom of the bench. I'm going to save the final flattening obviously once the bench is done, but since I will be putting joinery to the bottom of the bench, meaning mortises for the legs, I want it to be relatively flat. So using my new birthday present, actually, brand new Veritas scrub plane, and I'm just working my way, traversing I believe it's called, across the grain. You can see all the scallop patterns on the bottom of the bench there. Actually on the camera it kind of looks like this is all curly ash. It's kind of cool. Anyway, if you look at the glue joints down here where I haven't traversed yet, obviously you can see a lot of the glue squeeze out. And I'm also seeing that I've got a little bit of a high section here in the middle because I'm not getting the cuts on the glue on either side of that glue joint, but I'm seeing scallops all the way across the board. Likewise down here I've got a little bit of the opposite problem where I'm getting cuts in the middle but not on the outer edge. So what I'm going to do is keep traversing until I start getting uniform scallop marks all the way across the bench top. And that's how you know you've got it nice and flat. And then I'll probably run back over it with the joiner plane after that, length along the grain in order to get it nice and flat. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I do want it to be relatively flat since I will be cutting joinery to mount the legs on. Okay, back to work. Phew. One of the things you probably noticed in that last clip is this is way too high to be hand planing. This countertop is specifically designed to be a little bit higher so that I could do some more power tool type things. I do a lot of routing on this countertop right now, and you know, it's a good space right now because my sawhorses set up in the corner still have some parts for the bench, some of the stretchers and the front laminations as well. But so I've got it set on this countertop, and it's probably almost 38, maybe 40 inches high with this 4-inch thick top. Standing here with the hand plane up this high, it's all arm muscles at this point, and I'm worn out. I've traversed that entire bench top. Still a couple of little sections of glue that I may want to hit again, but just using the plane across the board, I can see that I've got a pretty flat surface now across the width. It's just hard work when it's this high. I'm going to be excited to move this down onto the sawhorses in a little bit and be able to use this as a bench top during construction, but at a much lower height so that I can use my leg muscles a little bit more. So anyways, just in case anybody was watching that going, that's too high, he needs to lower that, I don't really have any choice right now. So
now that I've moved the bench over onto the sawhorses, it's time to flush up the ends, and I decided it was a good opportunity for some sawing practice. So first I saw the end that's eventually going to house the bench-crafted vise using my bow saw. Just wanted to remove most of the meat before flushing it with the router. And then over into the other side, there is no mating joint here. There will be no vise put here. So I figured it would be a good opportunity to break in my Diston D23 crosscut saw. And here I'm just establishing the vertical kerf square to it and check that line. And then once I really have established the kerf that I'm going for, I just try to track the line that I've scribed horizontally across the bench. And this is really just giving the arms a workout at this point. Working our way across the bench, trying to stay steady and keep the curve straight both up and down and horizontally. Here I come to the really thin part in the section I'm trimming, and I'm trying to lighten up here so I don't get too much tear out. And then I decided I'll go ahead and reach over and tear off that flap. And that ended up being a bad idea because that flap is actually kind of helping me stay in my curve. So to reestablish, I laid the saw down and began to work across the horizontal line. Once I had that curve established again, it was back to the traditional sawing form. And here it's just powered on through to the end of the cut. As I drew near the end of the cut, obviously I need to be careful of any tear out on the back end of that cut. But really, from here, it's just good old-fashioned sawing.
I begin cutting the ends of my bench flush, and actually these two pieces sticking out here are part of the front lamination, so they're just kind of off to the side now. But this particular end of the bench, we're looking at the bottom of the bench. It's upside down right now. This particular end of the bench, which will eventually be the left-hand side of the bench, is where the bench-crafted end vise is going to go. So because I'll be mating an end cap here on a tongue, it's particularly important that this edge be perfectly square and perfectly flat. So what I'm doing here is actually milling it flat using a router. I cut the bulk of the waste off actually just using a handsaw. Believe it or not, I tried to use my circular saw and it's just not beefy enough. It's just a cheap 7 1/4 Craftsman. It's just not made for taking off that much wood despite the depth of the cut. So I went old school, used a handsaw, and then going back over, referencing off a straight edge and a spiral router bit, I'm able to cut to this depth. And what I'll be doing once I flip the bench over is using a flush trim bit, referencing off this face with a bearing and then trimming the rest of this flush. And then from there I'll cut the tongue into it that the mortise on the end cap will register against. The other end of the bench down here, there isn't anything going on this end of the bench, so it's not as important that this be perfectly flat and perfectly square. So I figured I would use this as a test of my hand sawing skills. And here you can see actually I've already cut part of this, so I've cut it off. I actually made, this would have been my third pass with the saw. I've got a substantial amount of length more than I need on this bench, and basically I set out a couple of test cuts and just started working my way across with actually with the panel saw up there on the wall that I mentioned in the show a couple episodes ago. And I'm definitely still running into issues with keeping the cut on a line in both planes. This was the best of my cuts, and I was actually able to follow the line horizontally along the bench quite well. I only deviated in a couple spots, and I was pretty happy about that. I also scribed lines on the vertical, and I stuck to the line there, but you can see right there my kerf got off and went in at an angle and basically stayed that way along the rest of the bench. I couldn't really get it to correct. So you can see it best from the other side of the bench. What ended up happening is we've got this edge is not square, and you can see the original line right there. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to go over it with my low angle jack plane and flush the whole thing up. In fact, if you look at the shiny spot on the face there, this section here, it's where I've already worked it a little bit with the block plane, or excuse me, the jack plane. But there's a pretty substantial amount of meat here that needs to be removed, and I think what I'm going to do is get out my old trusty low angle spoke shave, since we are dealing with end grain, and go ahead and rough the majority of this off, because the cut actually is pretty close to square down here, and it starts to bow out right as we get into this area. And as you can see by the plane track there, right here is where that bevel, if you will, of this edge starts to fall off. The rest of this is pretty straightforward. So I'll just hog this off with a spoke shave, and then I'll come back at it with the low angle jack plane. Just keep going back here and checking where I am to my line. Alright, I've removed most of the meat using the spoke shave. If you can look over here on the edge, I actually planed or used the spoke shave to create a small chamfer to that line. Now what I can do with my jack plane is basically plane that bevel off, and I know I'll be flat.